Hello and welcome, I'm Olas Gerjuk and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. Today we're talking about mass deportations between Poland and the Ukrainian Soviet Republic, which occurred 75 years ago. Polish-Ukrainian repatriation agreement was signed by Nikita Khruschov, the USSR Communist Party leader at that time. This brutal decision led to more than 500,000 ethnic Ukrainians being forcefully deported to the Ukrainian SSR, and at the same time over 500,000 Poles were exiled from the Ukrainian territory where they had lived for centuries. To talk more about those tragic events, we are joined in the studio today by Yana Prymachenko, Senior Research Fellow of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, Institute of History of Ukraine. Hello and thank you for joining us today.
Hello.
So, we all know that these deportations coincided with the war, the Second World War ending. They began in 1944, but could you explain the audience what was the reason of this barbaric decision?
Well, in such a way, Stalin tries to overcome the colonial legacy of World War I and World War II, because after there are a lot of mixed population along the border, and he decided to create a mono-ethnic state. Mono-ethnic Ukraine and mono-ethnic Poland. In such a way, they try just to realize this scenario. And the whole action had two stages. The first one was quite peaceful. And it started in 1944 and continued till September 1945. But many Ukrainians who lived in Poland for centuries, they didn't want to leave their
homes, their settlements, right?
Yes, and they tried to avoid this deportation. They escaped to the neighbor countries such as Czechoslovakia and spent there a couple of months and then returned back home. So in 1945, Soviet authority asked Polish Communist Party just to help these Ukrainians to resettle to the Ukrainian
to
territory.
kick these people out of Poland. But we know that, yes, Soviet authorities were assuring people that the resettlement would be done in a peaceful manner after a consent of every other person. But then we know that people, in fact, were oppressed and repressed. Could you tell us what was happening? Could you tell the international audience, because I think that many people are just unaware of those events. And also, you said that Stalin was interested in creating this mono-ethnic countries. Why was there such interest?
Well, if we look at the beginning of World War II, we would see that the major cause of this war was the idea that we support or just we support our ethnic minority on the neighboring country. And Hitler used these arguments when he actually seized Czechoslovakia. So Stalin decided to put an end for such arguments. And the Poland also
and to
was
kick
interested.
Out all the national minorities.
Yes, and the Poland also was interested in this situation because Germans who live in the western part of the Poland were ousted from these territories, and the same was done with the Germans who lived in the Czechoslovakia, I mean Sudet region. So this is a common situation for post-war Europe. Unfortunately, many people didn't know about the situation and prefer not to speak about the situation now. But actually it was a common policy of every state of Central and Eastern country of every country in Central and Eastern Europe. Yes.
How brutal were the actions of communists?
Well, the most brutal action was in 1947. It was called Operation Vistula. And then Polish authority decided to make a deportation. It was a classic deportation because they used army, 21,000 soldiers were used just to deported 150,000 Ukrainians from the eastern Poland to the western part. And the idea was to disperse all these people among the western and
northern territory
of the Poland.
But the thing is, yeah, I think that this might be confusing for the audience, because on one hand, mass deportations were about resettling Ukrainians onto the Ukrainian SSR territories, Poles exiling Poles from Ukrainian territories back to Polish territories. But then Vistula operation was in 1947, as you mentioned, but it was about Ukrainians resettling them back to Poland.
Yes.
Why was that?
In 1946, Soviet Union refused to take any more Ukrainians from the Polish territory, because the situation is very bad after the war and there is no condition just to accommodate all these people. So they said that you have this problem of 150,000 Ukrainians and you should...
Still remaining on Polish territory.
Yes,
okay.
And you should
resettle them
choose
somewhere.
Any mean how to resolve this problem. And they decided just disperse this population among the Polish territory. There were three categories of population. Well, of the population, I mean Ukrainian population, were divided on three categories. The category A was the Ukrainians who escaped the deportation in 1944-1946. The category B was the Ukrainians whose family member were in Ukrainian Insurgent Army. And the third category C, it was just the other.
The rest of the people.
Yes, the rest of the people.
And I think that this Vistula is connected to this Ukrainian Insurgent Army at the B category of population.
Yes, but I think it was just a fake reason, because only 2,000 Insurgent Army soldiers were on this territory. And the main target of this deportation was civilians, not the militant.
Let's just explain the audience that, as you say, you think that the aim was fabricated, yes? That
yes.
The motivation of this Operation Vistula was to disperse the Ukrainian civilian population who were supporting the Ukrainian Insurgent Army that was, fighting for Ukraine's independence back in that time. According to Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance, around 750,000 Ukrainians were deported from Poland during this year's, during the whole period of mass deportations, and around 790,000 Poles were exiled within the first 2 years from 1944 until 1946, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Polish and Jews. Jews who was who has had a citizenship of Polish state before 1939.
How accurate is this data?
I think it's quite accurate.
It's quite accurate, yes. That we can say that this many people suffered during these mass deportations, brutal mass deportations. Would the states provide these people with any guarantees of housing, of any sort of support or anything like that?
No, actually, it was the most sad part of the story, because they were just lived in the in the houses, on some broken houses. If we talk about the Ukrainians who were resettled to the western part of the Poland, they just settled in the abandoned houses of Germans. Who were ousted, yes, from the Poland, and many of these houses were broken. So the situation was very difficult, and during the deportation, a lot of people died because of the condition of the deportation. The whole action was 3 months, but it's sometimes it takes for one family to get to the place of the resettlement months or maybe 50 days. So it was very difficult, because they were sent to one point of railway station, then to another, then to the destination point of their new settlement, and it was a very difficult situation, and they don't have enough food because they don't have much time just to gather some things. They actually were given only 15 or 20 minutes just to get something with them.
To basically to gather all the stuff that all the belongings that they would want, or that they would want to have to keep, or that they would be able to carry with them. But if you say that they would switch so many railway stations and checkpoints where they would have to transfer to some other railway or other road, this means that people could not just have any belongings. Well, Ukrainians at that time they were poor.
The same story is about the deportation of 1944-1946, because many people were ousted from their homes, and they actually had nothing with them, just come to the empty place, and they were sent to the collective farms like workers, so the situation was very difficult.
How were these events portrayed by the Soviet propaganda?
I think it was silent because of this situation, and we rediscover all these events only after 1991, when the Soviet Union
collapsed and Ukraine got independent. So basically, pupils in Soviet schools would never even learn about Vistula operation, about this mass deportation. No one was aware of these events. No one.
But in Poland, they started to speak about this Vistula operation in 1950s, and they actually condemned this operation. And after 1950s, they actually allowed these people who were deported to change the place of their living, but they couldn't return to their home back. As for the Soviet Union, it was absolute silence about all this situation, and many people were afraid to talk about this. I know some families who were resettled from the Poland territory to the Donbass, and their grandfathers and grandmothers afraid to talk about this to their actually grandsons and granddaughters. They were so afraid that this information could cause some damage for their grandsons and granddaughters that they prefer to keep silent.
Just to stay silent. This is a big tragedy that happened to both nations, and I'm curious, how does it influence the relations between Ukraine and Poland now? Because it is, first aspect, it is important to remember past so we can learn from our mistakes. And question number one, are we really learning the lesson well? And the second aspect is that looks like Russia is a common foe of Poland and Ukraine, as Russia is the main successor of the Soviet Union, geographically and in terms of policy also. So how do you think the remembrance of these events influence the relations between the two countries right now at this moment?
At this moment, we have a quite difficult situation as for the memory politics, but in 1990, the Polish Senate condemned the situation and the Operation Vistula. And in 2007, both presidents of Ukraine and of Poland, I mean Yushchenko and Kwasniewski, condemned this mass deportation, and there was a common commemorating events dedicated to this situation. But now we have some problems and with our Polish partners, and some topics are very actually controversial.
Very heated. We're
Yes,
talking
very
about partisan
heated.
movement.
And I think that Russia used sometimes these historical arguments just to create this tension between
Between
Poland
Ukraine and Poland.
Ukraine. Yes.
Yes, because on one hand, Ukrainian insurgent army was killing Poles, but on the other hand, defending Ukrainian territory and Ukrainian people and fighting for Ukraine's independence. So the topic is truly very controversial, but we're not digging into that. We discussed mass deportations, and I thank you for informing us once again about these tragic events, and thank you for all the clarifications.
Thank you.
That was Yana Prymachenko, Senior Research Fellow of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine at Institute of History of Ukraine. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more with UATV.